Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Forecast brought to you by Ag South Farm Credit. Well, since I haven't talked to you since the end of last year, I thought we'd just start off by doing a quick recap of what December gave us. And overall, throughout much of Ag South territory, we saw above average precipitation. You can kind of see it from parts of southern Georgia through north and South Carolina up to Virginia. We were above average on precipitation. Now, not all of that came at once. We did see some regional drought develop back here in parts of the Mid-South, which did creep into parts of the Southeast, including this part of Georgia. But overall, when we take a look at the very end, that was one of the drier spots in the country with rain flanking on either side of it, including some snow. Now, thinking about that, I want to show it to you another way. The map that you're looking at here is our newest drought monitor, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the drought monitor, the newest one that came out on January 2nd, compared to the one back on October 3rd. You see, in the United States, we start a water year, as we call it, every October. And so since then, this is how much things have changed. So that was what things look like on October 3rd. This is what they look like now, okay? October 3rd, this is how they've changed now. So you can see this kind of spreading in this area. Now, we don't like to see drought anywhere near Ag South territory. We want to see drought being removed throughout this, this winter time period getting into early spring. So we're going to pay close attention to how the drought surrounding Ag South's territory does start to shift around because we don't want this lingering, causing a problem come early spring. So I'm going to get to that. Before I'm going to get to that, very active pattern coming up, major cold coming up, a shift coming around because of El Nino happening for the second half of this winter. And then I also got to tell you about the new long-range stuff and what's going on in South America. So that's these tabs on the top here. Let's get into it. First, I recapped the precip in December. What about the temperatures? But the only spot that was close to normal was parts of the South and Southeast. Much of the upper Midwest, in fact, the whole northern tier of the United States was near record warm, partly to blame because of honestly, two things. One is El Nino helping out, but two, we had deep troughs of cold air over Greenland and over Alaska. Well, that is gone. This is just a quick look at the newest setup. We have a ridge pushing here and a big ridge that's pushing there. So every time that happens, the flow has to come around and dive into the United States. If you want extended, long duration cold, put a bunch of heat into Alaska or into Greenland. It really helps that the jet is kind of cranked here across the Pacific. It's splitting out here by the Aleutian Islands, coming together to produce several shortwave troughs that even have a subtropical jet kicking through. And long story short, this is not only setting things up for us to be wet or continue to be wet, but also giving us the severe weather threat. We say, well, how long is it going to last? Well, if you look out there at day 10, what do we have? Still a ridge here, somewhere near Alaska, the Bering Sea, getting through the Aleutian Islands up to the Chukchi Sea, and then right over the heart of Greenland toward the Canadian archipelago. So the jet stream dips to the south. Look at that. And that's the kind of flow that we have to see in order to pack in some cold air initially and then start to increase the chances of maybe seeing some winter-type precipitation coming across parts of Ag South territory. That's right. I do think we have the chance for that. Part of the reasoning for that is over the next 5 days, we watch the temperatures begin to plummet here on the western side of North America, and that pushes east by day 5 through 10. These temperatures here are more than 20 degrees Fahrenheit colder than average. Now, day 10 through 15, how far into the south and southeast does it make it? We're going to get some pretty cold air that'll probably make it all the way to the southern tip of Florida, so be prepared for some pretty sharp changes in temperature coming up soon. But ahead of it, a lot of rain and some severe weather is on its way. Now, since I mentioned the colder air, I do want to show you where we stand on snowfall. And this was through early in the morning on Sunday, January the 7th. It's a season-to-date percent of normal snowfall map. Now, we did have over the weekend some huge snows that came into parts of New England. You can see them lining up on the Appalachian Mountains, and then several places in here picking up well over a foot of snow in parts of Pennsylvania, New York, and then, of course, several of the states in New England. But it's what's following this, the system that's come in and hit the west pretty hard and is about to eject later in the day today on Monday in the plains. That's going to be the real punch this week. So we've certainly got to be getting in here and talking about what it's going to do. Now, I've been explaining this weekend to myself by just watching the position of the jet. And as we go through Monday into Tuesday, this is what we often call a textbook case. You see, the subtropical jet is here. The polar jet is there. And what you've got is strong winds rounding the base of a trough, strong winds exiting the trough, strong winds sitting on the nearby ridge. And all of these things combined produce right here, where I'll put the X, a tremendous amount of upper level support to develop a low pressure system at the surface. Now, the whole trough package is going to carry this straight through the Ohio River Valley. We're going to be on the southern side of this, where our wind profile is going to change in a way that we're going to get some pretty strong upper level winds, with our surface winds coming out of the south or south-southwest. The result of that is going to be some pretty strong wind shear. The net effect is that this system moving through Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday is going to increase the risk, especially on Monday into Tuesday, of severe weather south first and then southeast second, which means that Ag South territory is certainly to be caught in the crosshairs of this. Now, later on, getting into next Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, look, we have another round of this coming through. Do you see it? There it is. There's a subtropical component to the south, the polar component to the north, which means late this week into this weekend, we got another system rolling through. But this one's going to have some more cold air to work with, and that's going to be something to watch carefully, because as the system gets going, I'm going to be starting to talk about the threat of getting some ice back into the Appalachian Mountains. Remember, we had the threat for it on Saturday. This past weekend, we're going to be watching for more of that going forward with these cold air damming events. One thing I can tell you is that when you add it up, let me do it for you again. When you add up the winds that are coming, we've got some very, very strong winds early this week, then later this week, and then again over the weekend rolling through here. So multiple chances of some really strong winds, including coming right over the Appalachian Mountains, where we have the high wind watches through Monday into Tuesday night. We could get these gusts here well over 60 miles an hour. So very, very strong winds are coming. But what I want to discuss is the severe weather threat. So on Monday, the 8th, we're going to be keeping a close eye down here along the Gulf Coast, and that transitions east on Tuesday. So this is already a very large area of enhanced risk of strong to severe thunderstorms. When is our timing? To get this down, let's go to the high-res NAM model. Now, I'm going to back it up because I was already looking at this before I started to record. Through early Monday morning, this system cranks in the plains, delivers desperately needed rain to the Mississippi River Valley, which of course is still low. The soil moisture content is low. Look at the snows where the blizzard warnings are currently issued back here in plains. In fact, I'm not even sure if I showed you that yet. Just take a look. I'll just open a new tab. AgWeather.com. You should go to AgWeather.com and just it's all my contents here. But take a look at this. We've got blizzard warnings coming out of the southwest plains, winter storm warnings extending over this entire area. This is high wind advisory, flood watch, and all of this is spreading toward us, just so you know. And just so you understand, it's not done. Behind it, the next system is sitting and waiting. Now, if I can find that other tab, there it is. This is that system, 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, getting into Monday night. Look at the heavy rain, risk for some severe storms down here. And then as we play this in the overnight hours, that frontal boundary just cranks through Alabama. By 10 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, it's over parts of Georgia, strongly forced, risk of severe weather, already up to the enhanced category by the Storm Prediction Center. And then that front rips through us by Tuesday night. See that? So again, this is Tuesday morning, Tuesday night. That's your timing on this. And it will have all the ingredients necessary, including a tremendous amount of wind shear, to produce a risk of strong to severe storms. So please get prepared for this to come through. It's going to be packing quite a punch. Now, as you can tell on the back side of it, it's going to get kind of cold pretty quickly. And by midnight on Wednesday morning, we're going to see some snow coming into maybe parts of northern Alabama and Georgia, right up along the Appalachian Mountains. Now, the high-res NAM model only runs out to about this far, so we got to flip over to the comparison between the GFS on the left and the European on the right to see where it goes from there, okay? Now, these models were not performing that great earlier, but they've now kind of come into agreement. This is Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, and evening. That's when the front swipes through, giving us our greatest severe weather risk in parts of Ag South territory, and then it leaves, and behind it, some cold air tries to flood in. Now, you know I mentioned there's a second system, right? And it gets here by the weekend. So this is Thursday into Friday. Here it is, setting up on Friday night, Saturday morning, going right over that same path, giving us the risk of those strong storms again. So watch it again. This is now Friday morning, Friday midday. So this is our strong to severe storm risk here. Getting into Friday night, we're going to watch that again coming over the Carolinas and Virginia, all the way down to parts of Georgia and Florida as well. Notice that the European model is quicker with the progression. The GFS is later, so it's bringing in more of those storms overnight on Friday into Saturday morning. And then that system yanks on through, and this is when this large area of high pressure See it? It's in both models. Starts to sink through the plains, delivering brutally cold air after the 14th, 15th, and 16th. Now, what I'm worried about is if you have all that, what we call antecedent cold air that gets down here before a system that follows it, what we end up getting is on the 15th, 16th, and 17th, there's going to be another system that comes out. And you can see the timing's a bit different in the models. But what I'm concerned about as that one goes through is the risk of some ice in parts of AgSouth territory. Now let's go ahead and add up the rainfall of this first using the high-res European model. So here comes round one. So here it is. Ready? Monday, Tuesday, ripping through on Tuesday. Now you can see that the model is attempting to put down in some locations as those storms come through 2 to 3 to 4, maybe some places up to 5 inches of rain. Now, you may not look at this and go, oh, I'm going to get 5.2 inches. No, it doesn't work that way. This is just the model's representation of the heaviest corridor of rain, and it's going to be a lot as it comes through Tuesday, again, Tuesday into early Wednesday morning. Got it? Now, remember, we get a bit of a lull, and when's the next system get here? Friday. Watch it starting to add up already in the lower Mississippi River Basin on Friday morning. And it plays through us later in the day on Friday, getting into Saturday, with the GFS being the slower model, which means that rainfall comes later. But as you can tell, we're talking about over the next 7 days, some locally very, very heavy rain. And don't forget, by day 10, there's another round. See it there? That's next Wednesday. Not this upcoming one, but the one following it. The 16th, 17th. That's what we're looking at. So I just played you out 10 days from the high-res European model, and there's widespread 2 to 4 inches of rain with locally higher amounts, 5, 6, and 7 inches. Very heavy rainfall coming through. On the snowy side of it, I like the European model solution from Sunday midday. I'm recording this late on Sunday night. It does not have the risk of getting the snow into AgSouth territory just yet. I'll watch for it and keep an eye on this, but what I am concerned about is ice. And it's been a long time since you've had an ice storm warning. You know, some places in parts of South Carolina, it's been 2 years. In Georgia, over 3,600 days. But we could be on the lookout for the risk in this area. Here's the newest forecast out there on the 13th. Ready? 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, and possibly into the 18th. So I just want to let you know that I'm concerned about this ice storm risk once we get to mid-month. There's going to be enough cold air out ahead of this that the wintry precipitation could be working into our area. I don't have any better detail on it just now, all right? What I can show you, though, is how wet it's likely going to be. Over the next 10 days, this is the chance at getting 2 inches of rain. 2 inches of rain. We have a 90 to 100% chance in through here. If we step that up to 4 inches, this is what you've got. So very heavy rainfall likely coming into this corridor over that time period. And if I go to 1, I mean, it's just everywhere. Very, very wet setup in this pattern. Now, where does it land by the middle of the month and a couple days after? So if we get out there to the 19th, the jet extends in the Pacific, hits the west, and then here we continue to see a piece of the subtropical jet, the northern branch of the jet coming through and exits east. And that exiting east is building up into a ridge that's going into Greenland. And that Greenland ridge is a key component to getting systems to roll up the east coast. And that's why all of those forecasts, even into week 2, continue to keep parts of AgSouth territory on the wetter side of things, as I think this pattern kind of goes into a reset mode. All right, thinking about that, let's talk now about temperatures. Monday's a bit cooler here, a few degrees cooler. As we go into Tuesday, that's a warm-up ahead of this system that's going to help build in the instability here. This is the risk for severe storms as we get into Tuesday night. And as we go forward into Wednesday, a little of a cool down behind the system. Thursday, back over mild, but you can see the much colder air coming in to the central plains, the northern plains, the southern plains by Friday into Saturday. And that is going to invade our area by the time we get into next week. Just to show you that the European model matches up well with the GFS, there's the next 5 days, but as you see, moving toward day 5 through 10, and then day 10 through 15, much colder air getting sourced out of Western Canada is going to be moving down into AgSouth territory. Now, the polar vortex is currently disrupted, okay? So you can see that it's elongated way over here like this. It's all being helped by this larger ridge that's pushing into Alaska. Now, this is in the stratosphere, not the troposphere. But it's not yet fully linked up with the tropospheric polar vortex. There's two of them. There's one in the troposphere, that's a layer you and I live in. Then there's the stratosphere, the one that's above us. If they were linked up on top of one another, we'd talk about some brutally cold air for a while. Now let's talk about the long range before we talk about South America. I want to take you next to the newest update. This was released late in December, but the newest update on the seasonal drought outlook through spring is expecting those areas I mentioned earlier that are under drought to really fade toward drought improving and maybe even being removed across parts of Ag South territory and then to the west. That's critical to see how this is going to happen. But the big questions we want to know is, where does this pattern go in the near term versus the long term? So let me give you the near term. This is the new outlook from the European model from mid-January to mid-February. And you'll notice it's got some very characteristic flavors to it. In other words, drier here, drier there, and a big area of the mid-south and midwest dry. While wet into California, wet into Texas, and wet right here through Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina. Now, just looking at this, trying to understand why it looks that way, I'm going to make a case for kind of two different opportunities here, okay? When you see the forecast looking like these three areas drier, that's very El Nino-y in the pattern. But I think that right now the MJO is going to override El Nino. You see, the best rising motion over the next 15 days curls back into the Indian Ocean. Where to? Phase 2 of the MJO. It also pops back out here in the Pacific Ocean. Where? To phase 8. Now, the significance behind that in the near term is this. Phase 2 MJO in January drops a big trough here with a big North Atlantic ridge. Result? Systems roll out of this area straight into the east side of the United States. Phase 8 is very similar. See it? Look at that. Same feature, where the ridge is placed versus where the troughs originate. I look at all of that and I go, now wait a second. If that's the case, I'd expect a lot of systems to kind of develop and roll through just like this, meaning that this drier western side of this map here, I'm talking about divide it right in there and just say west of it, I don't think it's going to be as dry as forecast. I think this is too much El Nino. El Nino's peaked. Okay, here it is. That is your El Nino right there. It's as strong as it's going to get. Why can't it get any stronger? Cold water to the south, colder water to the north, and those two things have worked against the expansiveness and the depth of this El Nino. So our best models just released say that this El Nino is at peak and is expected to crash. I think the CFSV2, that's a US model, is doing it way too quickly. I think it'd be wiser if it did something a bit more like this, such that by next summer we're in neutral territory. Gosh, the CFSV2 is saying, no, give us full-blown La Nina by next hurricane season. I don't buy that yet. I'm tending to stick a bit closer with the European model forecast of El Nino being peak now but slowly fading back to neutral by July, August, and September, not crashing into La Nina like it's possibly saying. Now, I want to tell you something that's also going on here. Remember when we showed you that ocean temperature map? See how this cooler water that's here? That's part of a signal called the negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And that Pacific Decadal Oscillation is important to pay attention to because it tends to fluctuate about every 10 years, okay? So it goes from the full wavelength is 5 up, 5 down, all right? And what I want you to see is, let's just do this. If we come back here to 2013, 14, 15, all the way to now, we've spent since 2020 in the negative PDO space. Now, why is all of this important and even relevant? It's relevant because as we look out there at the impacts of this, I'm going to show you, if we say PDO versus El Nino, well, this is what El Nino is going to do for January to March. I'm going to create a plot that's going to correlate precipitation January to March with El Nino. Now, when you do this, it produces this graphic, which means blues are where it's going to be drier. Here, here, and here. You're going, now, wait a minute. Where's that? Where did I just see that? I just showed you that. Like, that's what this long-range European's going after. Dry, dry, and dry, right? But as we think about what this might actually do, let's combine this with maybe a thought about what might happen if we say, well, let's correlate this with the PDO. If we correlate it with the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, what's interesting is this area, now the blue meaning wet, we tend to be drier into Florida and drier along the coast. Which is going to win? Right now, I would tell you that El Nino is probably going to win. I think we're going to see more wet conditions than we are going to be seeing drier conditions. This is 100% being helped along by what's going on in the North Atlantic. And there's all sorts of different indices that you can use to kind of see how you think the pattern's going to set up with respect to history. And I'm just going to tell you, as long as we keep ridges of high pressure over Greenland and over Alaska, cold gets in, storm track goes south, and we're going to get good moisture. So to think about all of that into context, I want to stretch this out and show you some new long-range data. Now, I again think El Niño's the more dominant signal when you compare to the other factors going on in the Pacific. That may not be the case for summer, but it is the case for now. So January, February, March, wet. Going forward, this is all new data that I'm just showing you for the first time here. February, March, April, wetter than average. March, April, May, wetter than average. April, May, June, wetter than average. May, June, July, that's when it's finally starting to show a signal of going away from the very wet conditions. So if this El Nino fades slowly like the European model suggests it's going to be, we've got lots of moisture for the next 5, maybe 6 months. That doesn't mean you won't get drier shots in there, okay? But there's nothing to turn the atmosphere off. It's going to be continuing to go. Now, I also had some other data that was released. This is the February, March, April outlook from the National Multi-Model Ensemble. Wetter. This is now the outlook for March, April, May. Wetter. This is the outlook for April, May, June. Near normal, but still slightly wetter. What about May, June, July? Still stormy and wet. Where's the drought building in? In the plains. And let's go all the way out there to June, July, August. Wetter. Now, the reality of it is that El Niño's speed at which it fades will ultimately determine this. But I can tell you the faster it goes out, the greater the risk of the hurricane season is going to be next fall. But that's just an outlook. Right now, you don't have anything turning you away from wetter. And you're going, wait a minute, Snodgrass, talk about this. I don't buy into this at all. Because normally what happens after we fade out of an El Nino is we tend to get ridging over the south, which produces a lot of ridge-riding storms that come through the Midwest. So that's the summer pattern we're currently thinking is going to happen. I am not confident at all in it, but I wanted to show you the data. In the near term, from now through spring, there are much stronger signals that Ag South's territory is going to stay on the wetter side of average, and we're going to have multiple shots at some really good cold air coming forward. Speaking of wetter than average, I'm going to take you to the USDA's maps for Brazil. In the last 5 to 7 days, very heavy rains have hit the drought-parched regions of northern and central Brazil. I'm talking about this area right here. If you go back 3 months, it's been extremely dry in that area. We've talked about this at length, but they've recently got a whole lot of rainfall. What are they expected to get? There's more coming in the next week, but when you stretch it over 2 weeks, the week 2 signal goes in drier again. Now, what's the problem with that? Nothing. I don't think it's a problem at all. In fact, if it went back over a little drier, they're supposed to be harvesting this soybean crop. It's going to really pick up mid-January through the end of February. What is actually the worst case scenario in terms of precipitation in Brazil is if this happens. By the end of January, if the forecast comes back in wet into this area, this is right when they need to be in the heart of harvest. And wetter than average conditions during that time frame can really slow down harvest, which means cotton, safrinha cotton is going to go in later. It means safrinha corn is going to go in later. It's going to mean that the quality of the soybean crop getting harvested under wet conditions could be compromised. As it currently stands, just doing the analysis on how much damage we think was done to the Brazilian crop, we think that in total it is off by about 12%. So in other words, if you just took that and said, well, if they were expecting a crop well over 160 million metric ton, it's probably much closer to 150 million metric ton at this point. So if these rains come back in, it's going to be a further kind of kicking the can down the road problem with the harvest of one crop and the planting of the next, which shifts the crop calendar and increases the chances that the U.S. export market will have to cover. So I'll be watching this carefully. I want to point out one more thing as I wrap this up. The thing I want to talk about is Argentina. This past weekend in Cordoba right here, Cordoba, in my opinion, is the equivalent of Illinois. That's what that state looks like down there. They just got a tremendous amount of rainfall, and over the next 15 days, they're expected to see even more of this, which means that Argentina went from famine to feast. And unfortunately, this is coming in with too much water at times, causing some major issues. So a lot to continue to stare at and try to understand here in South America. I feel like the whole continent is spring-loaded for a potential problem with too much water south, not enough to the north, and then a flip on that pattern right when we need to get harvest done. And as a result, I think it's going to be a major part of the weather premium if there's one built into the markets. So I'll stop there. Tell you all a good week and look forward to talking to you again next Monday. Thanks.